The government has reopened, and the crisis appears to be over. But buried within the legislation that ended the shutdown lies a collection of provisions that will fundamentally reshape how our federal government operates for years to come. While the media focused on whether the government would reopen at all, Congress quietly assembled a package containing 15 sweeping changes that touch everything from workplace protections to agricultural security, from technology bans to food safety regulations. Some of these provisions will directly impact your daily life. Others will change the machinery of government in ways most citizens will never see. And at least one section has sparked controversy even among the legislators who voted for it, simply because they didn't realize it was there until after the bill passed. Today we're going to unpack every single one of these changes. We'll explore what they mean, who they affect, and why they matter more than the headlines suggest. Let's begin. Change number 1. Comprehensive federal workforce restoration. The first major provision mandates the immediate reversal of every single termination, furlough, and reduction in force action taken during the shutdown period. This isn't just about bringing people back to work. It's about restoring the entire infrastructure of federal service delivery. Under the new law, agencies must reinstate every affected employee to their exact previous position, provide full back pay with no exceptions or delays, restore all benefits including health coverage and retirement contributions, complete the entire reinstatement process within 5 business days, submit detailed reports to Congress documenting compliance. The impact extends far beyond the employees themselves. Federal service delivery depends on institutional knowledge, continuity, and expertise that cannot be replaced overnight. When Social Security Administration offices lose experienced claims processors, application backlogs can extend for months. When the Veterans Administration loses healthcare coordinators, appointment scheduling systems collapse. When IRS service centers lose trained representatives, taxpayer assistance becomes nearly impossible. For older Americans, this workforce stability directly translates to service quality. Retirement benefit applications get processed, Medicare questions get answered, tax refunds arrive on schedule. The restoration provision isn't just about jobs. It's about maintaining the infrastructure that millions of people depend on every single day. Change number 2. State reimbursement with interest for emergency services. During the shutdown, multiple state governments faced an impossible choice. Watch essential programs collapse or spend state taxpayer money to keep federal programs running. Several states chose the latter, using emergency funds to maintain SNAP benefits, keep Medicaid systems operational, and ensure child nutrition programs continued without interruption. The new legislation doesn't just reimburse these states, it compensates them with interest for every dollar spent. This creates a powerful precedent. States that step in during federal crises will be made financially whole, encouraging similar action in future emergencies. The implications are profound. SNAP serves approximately 42 million Americans, including millions of seniors living on fixed incomes. For many older adults, these benefits represent the difference between adequate nutrition and food insecurity. When states know they'll be reimbursed for emergency spending, they're far more likely to act quickly during future crises rather than waiting for federal dysfunction to resolve itself. This provision transforms crisis response from a financial gamble into a reliable partnership between federal and state governments. It ensures that political breakdowns don't translate into empty pantries for vulnerable populations. Change number 3. Massive security infrastructure investment. The legislation allocates hundreds of millions of dollars for security enhancements across multiple branches and agencies of government. The funding breakdown includes judicial security. The U.S. Marshals Service receives substantial funding increases for protective details assigned to federal judges, their families, and courthouses nationwide. The Supreme Court gains dedicated security appropriations separate from general judicial budgets. Legislative security, Capitol Police receive enhanced budgets for training programs, equipment upgrades, intelligence operations, and mutual aid agreements with local law enforcement. Members of Congress gain funding for district office security assessments and residential protection measures. Executive security, federal facilities, housing benefits offices, regulatory agencies, and public-facing departments receive funding for physical security upgrades, threat assessment capabilities, and emergency response protocols. The justification is straightforward. Threats against public officials and government facilities have increased dramatically. But the real-world impact extends to ordinary citizens accessing government services. When a Social Security office improves its security infrastructure, it becomes safer for seniors conducting business there. When threats against federal employees decrease, service quality improves because workers can focus on their jobs rather than their safety. This investment recognizes that an insecure government cannot serve its people effectively. The funding aims to create environments where both workers and citizens can interact safely and productively. Change number 4. Electronic communications privacy for legislative offices. One of the most surprising inclusions establishes new protocols for how law enforcement and intelligence agencies handle Senate electronic communications during investigations. The provision creates multiple layers of protection. Mandatory notification. Service providers must immediately notify Senate offices when their communications are accessed during investigations, with limited exceptions for ongoing criminal matters. Challenge process. Senators gain formal mechanisms to challenge what they believe is improper access to their communications, creating an appeals process within the judicial system. Documentation requirements. Agencies must maintain detailed records justifying each instance of access, subject to oversight by inspectors general and congressional committees. This provision wasn't part of the original shutdown negotiations. It emerged from separate concerns about investigative overreach and legislative privilege, but got attached to the must-pass shutdown legislation. The timing raised eyebrows among transparency advocates who argue that legislative communication should be subject to the same legal processes as everyone else's. For ordinary Americans, the direct impact is minimal. But the precedent matters. It creates a two-tier system of privacy rights, one for legislators and another for everyone else. It also demonstrates how crisis legislation can become a vehicle for unrelated policy changes that might not survive standalone scrutiny. Change number 5. Hemp-derived cannabinoid regulations. The legislation dramatically tightens regulations around hemp-derived products, particularly synthetic cannabinoids like Delta-8 THC, Delta-10 THC, HHC, and THCP. These compounds have flooded the market in recent years, operating in a legal gray zone created by the 2018 Farm Bill. The new rules establish manufacturing standards. Products must meet specific purity requirements and undergo third-party laboratory testing for potency and contaminants. Age restrictions. Sales to individuals under 21 are prohibited nationwide, with criminal penalties for violations. Labeling requirements. Packages must include clear warnings, cannabinoid content, and disclosure of intoxicating effects. Retail limitations. Products can no longer be sold in convenience stores or gas stations without specific licensing and compliance measures. For seniors, the implications are complex. Many older adults have turned to hemp-derived products for pain management, sleep assistance, and anxiety reduction, often because traditional medications proved ineffective or carried unwanted side effects. Some of these products may become harder to find or more expensive as manufacturers reformulate to meet new standards. However, the regulations also address legitimate safety concerns. The unregulated market has produced products with wildly inconsistent potency, contamination issues, and misleading labels. Tighter oversight may improve product safety even as it reduces availability. Change. Number 6. Transformative WIC funding expansion. The Women, Infants, and Children Nutrition Program receives a $600 million funding boost, guaranteeing full benefits through September 2026. This represents one of the largest single-year increases in the program's history. WIC serves approximately 6.6 million people monthly, providing nutritious foods, nutrition education, and healthcare referrals to pregnant women, new mothers, and young children. The expanded funding ensures no eligible family faces benefit reductions due to participation growth or cost increases. While seniors don't directly receive WIC benefits, millions are deeply invested in the program's success. Grandparents raising grandchildren depend on WIC to stretch household budgets. Older adults in multi-generational households benefit when younger family members receive adequate nutrition support. And in communities where seniors live near families with young children, WIC participation reduces overall food insecurity, creating healthier, more stable neighborhoods for everyone. The funding increase also addresses a critical vulnerability. WIC operates on annual appropriations, making it susceptible to political battles and government shutdowns. By providing multi-year funding certainty, the legislation removes this vulnerability and allows states to plan program operations more effectively. Change. Number 7. Extended full-year appropriations for critical departments. Rather than continuing the cycle of short-term funding extensions and constant crisis management, the bill provides full-year appropriations through September 2026 for several key areas. Department of Veterans Affairs. The VA receives guaranteed funding for healthcare services, benefits processing, facility maintenance, and mental health programs. This stability allows the department to hire staff, plan capital improvements, and expand services without constantly worrying about funding cliffs. Military construction. Base housing, facility improvements, and infrastructure projects gain funding certainty, preventing the stop-start cycles that increase costs and delay completions. Agriculture programs, farm assistance, rural development, food safety inspections, and conservation programs continue without interruption, providing stability to farming communities and food supply chains. Food and nutrition services, SNAP, school lunch programs, and food distribution networks operate with predictable funding, allowing states to manage benefits efficiently. For seniors, especially those who are veterans or live in rural communities, this stability directly improves service quality. VA medical centers can hire specialists and maintain facilities. Rural communities gain access to development programs. Food assistance remains reliable regardless of political dysfunction. The broader lesson is simple. When government agencies can plan beyond the next crisis, they serve people better. Multi-year funding doesn't solve every problem, but it removes one of the most destructive sources of government inefficiency. Change. Number 8. Expanded technology security restrictions. The legislation strengthens and extends existing bans on federal procurement of telecommunications and surveillance equipment from companies linked to foreign adversaries. The expanded restrictions specifically target 5 companies: Huawei, ZTE, Hikvision, Dahua, and Hytera. The implementation affects federal buildings, all surveillance cameras, access control systems, and communications infrastructure must use equipment from approved manufacturers. Benefits offices, Social Security Administration offices, Medicare centers, and VA facilities must audit existing equipment and replace non-compliant technology. Contractors and grantees. Organizations receiving federal funding must certify they don't use prohibited equipment in systems handling federal data or communications. Supply chain. Oversight. Federal agencies must verify that approved equipment doesn't contain components or software from prohibited manufacturers. The security rationale is well documented. Intelligence agencies have raised concerns about surveillance equipment that could provide foreign governments with access to sensitive locations, communications, and data. But the practical implementation creates significant challenges and costs. For seniors, the impact is indirect but real. Replacing surveillance and communication systems in thousands of federal facilities is expensive. Those costs compete with funds that could otherwise expand services. However, the trade-off accepts short-term costs to prevent long-term security vulnerabilities that could compromise benefit systems, healthcare records, or personal information. Change number 9. Congressional compensation. Freeze lawmakers will not receive cost of living adjustments for fiscal year 2026, freezing congressional salaries at their current level of $174,000 for rank-and-file members. The freeze is largely symbolic. Congressional salaries represent a tiny fraction of the federal budget, but the symbolism matters politically. After a shutdown that disrupted millions of lives and threatened essential services, any move to increase congressional pay would have generated enormous backlash. The practical effect is minimal. Members of Congress receive substantial benefits beyond base salary, including generous health care, retirement plans, and office budgets. A single-year salary freeze doesn't significantly impact their financial situations. However, the gesture acknowledges public frustration with political dysfunction. It's a small recognition that when government fails to function properly, the people responsible shouldn't reward themselves. Whether this symbolic action translates into better governance is another question entirely. Change number 10. FDA food traceability requirement postponement. The Food and Drug Administration planned to enforce comprehensive food traceability requirements starting in 2026. Requiring detailed tracking of certain foods throughout the supply chain from farm to retail. The new legislation delays enforcement until January 2028. The FDA rule would have required electronic record keeping. Companies must maintain digital records of food sources, processing steps, and distribution channels for specific high-risk foods. Data sharing. When contamination occurs, companies must rapidly provide detailed traceability information to regulators. Standardized formats. Records must follow specific formats, allowing quick analysis during outbreak investigations. The agricultural industry argued these requirements would impose substantial compliance costs, particularly on smaller operations. They claimed the expenses would inevitably flow through to consumer prices. The delay provides additional time for implementation without the compliance burden taking effect during a period of elevated food costs. For seniors living on fixed incomes, food prices are a constant concern. Any regulation increasing costs hits this population particularly hard. The delay potentially slows price increases while still maintaining the eventual goal of improved food safety tracking. However, the trade-off is real. Better traceability systems could detect contamination faster, potentially preventing widespread illness during outbreaks. The delay means that during the next 2 years, the food supply remains more vulnerable to contamination events that could have been detected earlier with better tracking systems. Change number 11. Hawaiian coffee geographic authenticity standards. The legislation establishes strict geographic labeling requirements for Hawaiian coffee products. Any product labeled as Kona, Maui, Oahu, or Kauai coffee must contain at least 51% beans actually grown in the named region. Previously, products could use these premium labels with minimal percentages of authentic Hawaiian beans. The provision addresses long-standing concerns from Hawaiian farmers about fraudulent labeling that undercut genuine products. Coffee marketed as Kona blend might contain only 10% actual Kona beans mixed with cheaper beans from elsewhere, yet command premium prices based on the Kona reputation. The new standards protect both farmers and consumers. Hawaiian coffee farmers can compete more fairly when their authentic products aren't undercut by mislabeled blends. Consumers who pay premium prices for Hawaiian coffee will actually receive what they believe they're buying. For seniors who purchase premium coffee products, this means greater confidence that expensive purchases are authentic. It's a small consumer protection, but one that addresses a genuine problem in specialty food markets where geographic origin significantly affects both price and quality. Change the Mibara 12 agricultural representation in national security reviews. The final major change adds the Secretary of Agriculture to the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, the interagency body that reviews foreign investments for national security implications. Previously, CFIUS included representatives from Treasury, Defense, State, Commerce, and other agencies, but not agriculture. This meant that foreign purchases of farmland, agricultural biotechnology companies, and food processing facilities received national security reviews without dedicated agricultural expertise at the table. The addition reflects growing concerns about foreign acquisition of American agricultural assets. Recent years have seen significant purchases of U.S. farmland by foreign entities, particularly from China. While most transactions involve legitimate business purposes, some raise concerns about food security, rural community stability, and access to agricultural technology. With agriculture at the table, CFIUS reviews will consider food security implications, whether foreign control of processing facilities or supply chain components could threaten domestic food security during crises. Technology transfer, whether agricultural biotechnology acquisitions could transfer valuable intellectual property to foreign competitors or adversaries. Rural economic impact, how large-scale foreign farmland purchases affect rural communities and domestic agricultural viability. Supply chain vulnerabilities, whether concentrated foreign ownership creates dependencies that could be exploited during international tensions. For seniors in rural communities, this protection helps preserve local farming operations and prevents wholesale foreign acquisition of agricultural land. For all seniors, it adds another layer of oversight to ensure the domestic food supply remains secure and domestically controlled. Change number 13. Emergency telehealth extensions for Medicare. Hidden within the bill is a temporary extension of Medicare telehealth flexibilities that were originally implemented during the pandemic. These provisions allow geographic flexibility. Medicare beneficiaries can access telehealth services regardless of where they live, not just in rural areas. Location flexibility. Patients can receive telehealth services at home rather than traveling to healthcare facilities. Provider expansion. A broader range of healthcare providers can deliver services via telehealth and receive Medicare reimbursement. The extension runs through December 2026, providing time for Congress to make permanent decisions about telehealth policy. Without this extension, millions of seniors would have lost convenient access to virtual healthcare services that became essential during the pandemic and have remained valuable. For older adults with mobility limitations, chronic conditions requiring frequent monitoring, or living in areas with limited healthcare access, telehealth represents a lifeline. The extension ensures these services continue while policymakers work on permanent solutions. Change, number 14. Postal Service financial stabilization. Measures. The legislation includes several provisions aimed at improving the financial stability of the U.S. Postal Service. Debt restructuring. Certain USPS debt obligations are restructured with more favorable terms, reducing immediate financial pressure. Delivery standards. The bill maintains 6-day mail delivery and establishes minimum service standards for rural routes. Rate adjustment authority. USPS gains slightly more flexibility in adjusting rates to cover costs while maintaining affordability requirements. For seniors, reliable postal service is essential. Many older adults depend on mail delivery for medications, benefit checks, correspondence with family, and access to information. Rural seniors particularly rely on postal service because alternative delivery services often don't adequately serve remote areas. The financial stabilization measures aim to keep USPS viable without requiring massive bailouts or service cuts that would disproportionately affect older Americans in rural areas who have few alternatives. Change. 15. Federal hiring and workforce development programs. The final provision establishes new federal hiring initiatives and workforce development programs aimed at addressing staffing shortages across government agencies. Streamlined hiring. Agencies gain new authorities to expedite hiring for critical positions, reducing the time from job posting to employee start date. Student loan repayment. Federal agencies can offer enhanced student loan repayment benefits to attract qualified candidates in high-demand fields. Skills training. Funding for training programs helps current federal employees develop skills needed for evolving job requirements. Retention bonuses. Agencies can offer retention incentives for employees in positions with high turnover or critical skill shortages. These provisions address a growing crisis in federal workforce capacity. Years of hiring freezes, budget constraints, and political attacks on government workers have created severe staffing shortages. When agencies can't hire and retain qualified employees, service quality suffers. For seniors interacting with federal agencies, filing Social Security claims, seeking VA health care, resolving Medicare issues, adequate staffing directly determines how quickly and effectively their needs are addressed. These workforce provisions aim to rebuild capacity so agencies can actually serve the public effectively. When you step back and examine all 15 provisions together, a pattern emerges. This legislation does far more than simply reopen the government. It fundamentally restructures how multiple aspects of federal operations work. Some changes directly improve services for older Americans, restored federal workforces, stable food assistance, extended telehealth, protected postal service, and enhanced agency staffing. These provisions recognize that government services matter deeply to millions of people who depend on them daily. Other changes address longer-term structural concerns: agricultural security, technology vulnerabilities, food safety systems, and foreign investment oversight. These provisions acknowledge that government must plan beyond immediate crises and address emerging challenges before they become catastrophic. Still others raise questions about process and priorities. How did hemp regulations, coffee labeling, and Senate communications privacy end up in a shutdown resolution bill? Why were these decisions made during a crisis rather than through normal legislative processes? The process problem. This brings us to the fundamental issue that extends beyond any single provision: the question of how major policy decisions should be made in a democratic system. Shutdown bills are supposed to be emergency measures, focused, limited, designed solely to restore government operations. Yet this legislation contains provisions affecting agriculture policy, consumer protection, national security, telecommunications, nutrition programs, healthcare delivery, and legislative branch operations. Some of these provisions underwent extensive debate and refinement in committees. Others appeared suddenly during final negotiations. Some were carefully considered by experts and stakeholders. Others emerged from last-minute political deal-making. The result is a bill that most legislators didn't fully read before voting, containing provisions that most citizens don't know exist, making decisions that will affect millions of people who never had the opportunity to weigh in. This approach has advantages. When political gridlock prevents normal legislative processes from functioning, attaching important provisions to must-pass bills can be the only way to get anything done. Some of these changes address genuine needs that have languished for years without action. But it also has serious drawbacks. Policy decisions made in crisis mode often lack adequate review and consideration. Provisions that wouldn't survive standalone scrutiny slip through when buried in massive emergency bills. Public participation and oversight become nearly impossible when consequential decisions happen behind closed doors under extreme time pressure. As you think about this legislation and its implications, several questions merit consideration. Should emergency legislation be limited strictly to emergency matters? Or is attaching other provisions to must-pass bills sometimes the only way to overcome political dysfunction and make needed policy changes? How much should we trust that policymakers are making good decisions when operating under crisis pressure with limited public oversight? Does the quality of policy suffer when normal processes are bypassed? Are the specific provisions included in this bill good policy? Some clearly provide needed protections or services. Others are more questionable. Several raise legitimate concerns about their long-term implications. What does this approach mean for democratic governance? When major decisions affecting millions of people happen in crisis-driven negotiations that most citizens never see or understand, can the system truly be called responsive to public will? Should there be reforms to prevent this pattern from continuing? Single subject requirements for legislation? Longer review periods for major bills? Greater transparency in negotiations? Limits on what can be included in emergency funding measures? These aren't questions with simple answers. Reasonable people can disagree about the right balance between efficient decision-making and democratic deliberation, between getting things done and ensuring those things are done well. The government is open, federal workers are back at work, essential services continue. In that sense, the crisis has passed. But the legislation that ended this crisis has set in motion changes that will continue unfolding for years. Some will improve lives and strengthen systems. Others may create new problems or unintended consequences. Many will go unnoticed by the people they affect most. Your role, as a citizen, taxpayer, and participant in democracy, is to stay informed, ask questions, and hold leaders accountable. Not just during crises, but especially during the normal times when the most consequential decisions often get made with the least public attention. This bill demonstrates how much can change in a single piece of legislation passed during a moment of crisis. Whether those changes prove beneficial or problematic will become clear only with time. But understanding what changed is the essential first step toward evaluating whether it was changed for the better. What are your thoughts on this legislation and the process that created it? Should Congress continue using emergency bills as vehicles for wide-ranging policy changes, or should there be stricter limits on what can be included? The conversation about how we make collective decisions is just as important as the decisions themselves.